There is a version of the papacy the world sees. The white figure on the balcony. The voice carrying across St. Peter's Square to tens of thousands of upturned faces. The motorcades and the audiences, and the diplomatic receptions, and the carefully orchestrated moments that get photographed and broadcast and discussed on every Catholic media network on the planet. That papacy is real. It matters. It is one of the most visible public offices in the world, and Leo XIV performs its obligations with full seriousness. But there is another version, the one that exists before the crowds arrive, the one that continues after the cameras leave, the one that happens in silence, in small rooms, along quiet garden paths, in the marginal minutes of a day that contains more than most people will absorb in a week. This version is where the man actually lives. And it is this version, the one no press release captures and no official schedule reflects, that reveals what Pope Leo XIV actually is. Beneath the title, beneath the institution, beneath the weight of representing 1.5 billion people in every public breath he takes. What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is what those who have worked closely with him describe, consistently and independently, when asked what they did not expect about this particular pope. It is the accumulation of small, daily, unremarkable choices that, taken together, form something remarkable. A life structured not around the demands of office, but around the requirements of a specific, serious, deeply formed interior practice. 7 habits. None of them designed for an audience. All of them telling the same story. The first begins before most of Rome knows it is awake. There is a private chapel on the upper level of the Apostolic Palace. It is not large. It is not ornate in the way that the Vatican's more theatrical spaces are ornate. It is a functional sacred room, simply furnished, lit by a single lamp and the soft perpetual glow of the tabernacle that marks the presence of what Catholics believe is kept there. By 5 in the morning, most days, Pope Leo XIV is already inside it. He celebrates Mass. Not the public Mass with its orchestrated formality, its processions and its cameras and its carefully managed participation. A private Mass, with only his personal secretary and 1 or 2 members of the household present. The altar is small. The congregation is almost nothing. The liturgy is identical to what is performed in the largest basilicas of the world, but the scale of it, the acoustic and the intimacy and the absence of witness, strips it of every element that is not its core. This practice did not begin with the papacy. It predates it by decades. As a young Augustinian friar, then as a priest in Chicago's South Side parishes, then as a bishop in the Peruvian highlands where the nearest large church might be a long drive over difficult roads, Robert Francis Prevost began each day at an altar. The circumstances changed dramatically. The practice did not. People who have been present for these early masses describe a quality of focus that is distinct from his public liturgical presence. Not more careful, exactly. More personal. The man at the altar in those pre-dawn masses is not performing. He is not managing the impression he is making. He is doing the thing he has done every day for 50 years. Because it is the foundation upon which everything else in his day rests. And without it, by his own testimony delivered in various forms across many years, nothing else holds its proportion. He has said, in one form or another, that prayer is not the interval between the real work. It is the source from which the real work draws its water. The early Mass is where he goes to the source, before the world's demands arrive, before the calls and the documents and the decisions and the weight of a role that generates its own gravity whether or not you are actively holding it. The first habit, then, is this. He begins every day in a room where nothing is required of him except honesty. He does it at 5 in the morning. He does it when he is tired. He does it when the demands of the coming day have already arranged themselves in his mind in their order of urgency. He does it anyway, and first, because he has understood since he was a young man in an Augustinian novitiate, that the quality of everything else depends on what happens in this room, before everything else begins. The second habit overlaps with the first and in some ways is an extension of it. After the morning Mass, in the window before the official day begins, he reads. Not briefings, not correspondence, not the accumulated institutional documents that the Vatican generates in breathtaking volume. Scripture. And alongside it, Almost always, the writings of Augustine of Hippo, the 4th century bishop of the North African city of Hippo, whose theology and spiritual autobiography have shaped the Augustinian tradition that Leo XIV entered as a young man and has inhabited ever since. The Confessions in particular, the great long autobiographical prayer that Augustine addressed to God rather than to human readers, working through his own restlessness and failure, and searching with a candor that has made it one of the most read documents in the history of Western literature. Leo has been reading it for his entire adult life. He returns to it the way some people return to a place that contains something they cannot find anywhere else. This morning reading is not academic. He is not studying the texts. He is in conversation with them. Those close to him have noted that he marks passages, not in the manner of a scholar building an argument, but in the manner of someone placing a finger on a sentence and holding it there, letting it press against whatever is live in him that morning. Sometimes he writes a short reflection in the margins. Sometimes he sits with a page for a long time without moving. What this practice produces is visible in how he speaks. The references are not decorations. They are not the kind of learned quotations that public figures deploy to signal erudition. They are live material, handled with the familiarity of things that have been carried for a long time and have therefore become part of the person carrying them. The second habit is this. He maintains a regular, daily, private conversation with the intellectual and spiritual tradition that formed him. Not because it is professionally useful, because it is personally necessary. Because a man who has learned that the deepest questions of existence were grappled with seriously by people who lived 16 centuries before him, finds it clarifying to keep that conversation active. The world outside the study is full of things that require his response. In this room, before the world enters, he is in dialogue with the things that do not require his response, but simply his attention. The third habit is one that surprises people when they first hear about it, because it is so structurally simple. He eats with other people. This requires a sentence of context. The logistics of a papal household would make solitary meals entirely normal. The schedule is demanding. The security requirements are real. The structural separation between the Pope and ordinary household life is both historical and practical. Popes eat alone all the time. Many prefer it. The solitude of a meal is one of the few guaranteed breaks in a day that grants very few. Leo XIV eats with his secretaries and the small community of people who make the household function. The meals are not elaborate. The conversation is not managed or formal. There is laughter. There are stories about the day, about things people have seen, about small absurdities and small kindnesses. There is the kind of talk that happens between people who know each other and are not performing. This came from Peru. In the Augustinian communities of Chiclayo and the surrounding region where he served for years, the communal meal was not a nicety. It was a theological statement. The Augustinian tradition places enormous emphasis on fraternal life, on community not as backdrop to individual spiritual development, but as the medium through which it happens. You do not become a better person alone. You become a better person in the friction and warmth and ordinary challenge of shared life. He carried that conviction from Peru into the papacy. The dining table in the papal household is where he practices it. It is where the man who governs a global institution with extraordinary demands on his attention sits down and is simply present to the people he lives with, asks how they are, listens to the answer, and spends 40 minutes in the unremarkable human activity of eating food with others. The third habit is the daily practice of choosing not to be isolated, of maintaining, even at the center of one of the most isolating positions on the planet, the specific warmth of ordinary human connection. It does not make headlines. It shapes everything. The fourth habit takes place outside. Several times each week, in the afternoons when the official schedule permits a gap, he walks in the Vatican gardens. The gardens are extensive and private, a managed landscape where the noise of the city is largely absent and where it is possible to move through something that is not stone and not paper and not the accumulated weight of institutional life. He walks slowly. He is not processing. He is not preparing remarks or rehearsing conversations. He is noticing things, which is a different activity. The particular color of a flower at a specific angle of light. the sound of a bird that has settled in a tree near the path, the quality of the air on a day in late March when winter is not quite finished, and something in the atmosphere is trying to decide what season it is going to become. This is Augustinian contemplative practice in its most accessible form. Augustine wrote extensively about what he called the traces of the divine in the created world, the idea that the made things point beyond themselves to the Maker, and that attending to them carefully is a form of prayer that requires no words. For Augustine it was philosophical. For Leo it appears to be experiential. The garden walks are where he lets his attention rest on things that are not urgent, and in doing so, recovers something that urgency erodes. Those who have occasionally accompanied him on these walks describe him as genuinely present to the physical environment in a way that public life rarely permits. Not distracted. Not thinking about the next meeting. Looking at what is in front of him. The fourth habit is this. He regularly puts his body in a place where the world's demands cannot immediately reach him, and allows his attention to rest on creation rather than institution. It restores something. It has always restored something. He will not sacrifice it to the calendar. The fifth habit is the one that consistently surprises the people who encounter evidence of it. He remembers names. Not in the professional political sense, the practiced recall of a person who has learned the technique because it is useful. He remembers names in the way that people remember names when the person behind the name actually registered for them. The woman in Peru, whose village was without a priest for 8 months, and who told him which saint she had been praying to instead. The child who handed him a drawing at an audience several years before the conclave, and whose name he wrote in a small notebook. The elderly pilgrim in the square who told him something about her grandmother that he has not forgotten. He writes notes, not to systems, not to databases, not to the institutional memory that large organizations maintain about the people who pass through them. Personal notes, in his own hand, brief messages, remembered details. He sends them. He asks after people by name in subsequent encounters. He carries, in a form that is not quite memory and not quite practice but something between them, the specific faces of the specific people he has met. This came from the missions. In northern Peru, in the communities he served for years, he learned what it costs a person to be known. In places where institutional support is thin and the margin between managing and not managing is narrow, being genuinely seen by someone with authority is not a small thing. It is sometimes a sustaining thing. He learned that, and he did not unlearn it when he moved into contexts where being genuinely seen was more readily available. The fifth habit is the daily, unspectacular practice of carrying people with him, of refusing to let the volume of the role reduce the individuals who pass through it to impressions rather than persons. It takes time. It requires a certain kind of attention that resists the efficiency impulse. He does it anyway, because he believes it is what the role actually requires, beneath all the other things it requires. The sixth habit comes at the end of the day, in the evening, in the private chapel or in his study. Before he sleeps, he reviews what the day has been, not its accomplishments, its quality. He examines, in the tradition that the Augustinian formation structures around the daily examination of conscience, what he did and did not do with what the day gave him, where he was present and where he was not, where he acted from what he actually believes and where he fell short of it. This is not self-flagellation. It is not the performance of humility. It is the specific practice of honest self-knowledge that Augustine identified as the prerequisite for genuine growth. The Confessions are, at their heart, an extended exercise in this. A man looking back at his own life without flattering himself, acknowledging what he was and what he chose, holding it in the presence of the God he addresses throughout, not to be destroyed by the accounting, to be honest enough to change. Leo ends each day this way. Then he prays Compline, the night prayer of the Church, the ancient chanted office that closes the liturgical day with an act of entrusting everything, the accomplished and the failed, the certain and the unresolved, to a care that does not depend on human effort to sustain it. He sleeps after that. People close to him say he sleeps well, which, given the weight of what he carries, is itself a kind of testimony to what the practice provides. The sixth habit is the nightly discipline of honest accounting and release, of looking at the day clearly and then putting it down, of bringing to the evening prayer not the curated version of who he was today, but the actual version, and finding in that honesty not condemnation, but the specific relief that comes when you stop carrying what you were never supposed to carry alone. The seventh habit is perhaps the simplest and the most countercultural of all. He slows down for the smallest people, not as a deliberate pastoral strategy, not as a communication technique, as what appears to be a genuine disposition, something built into the way he moves through rooms and squares and corridors. The child who holds up a drawing gets his full attention for the duration of its being shown to him. The elderly woman who cannot move quickly and who is therefore always at the back of the group gets waited for. The young priest who asks a question in a hallway gets an answer that treats the question as having been seriously asked. In the general audiences, when the momentum of the event is carrying everything toward its next choreographed moment, he stops. Not to be seen stopping. He stops because someone in front of him is worth stopping for. The photographs that result are not planned. They are the documentary evidence of a man who has not allowed the scale of his responsibilities to train him out of the small responses that make another person feel that they exist. This also came from Peru. In communities where his presence was sometimes the only institutional church contact people had for months, he learned that presence is not divisible into important presence and less important presence. It is either present or it is not. A person is either in the room with you or they are not. He practiced being actually in the room with people because the people had nothing else. He did not stop when the rooms got larger and the stakes got higher. He simply kept doing what he had always done. The seventh habit is this. He treats every encounter as the only encounter that is happening right now, not because he has been trained to, because he believes it is. The child with the drawing, the old woman at the back, the young priest in the corridor, they are not interruptions to the important work. In his theological framework, formed in community and mission and the long Augustinian tradition of finding God in the specific rather than the abstract, they are the important work. They always have been. These 7 habits, taken one by one, look like small things: an early mass, some morning reading, shared meals, afternoon walks, remembered names, an evening examination, unhurried attention to the people in front of him. Taken together, they describe the architecture of a life. They explain why the people who work closest to this particular pope describe him with words that tend toward the same cluster: unhurried, attentive, present, honest, grounded. They explain why someone who carries what he carries appears to carry it in a way that has not broken him. They explain the quality that observers keep reaching for different words to name, the quality of a person who is doing the thing they were actually built to do, and who has organized their private life around remaining capable of doing it. The world sees the balcony and the square and the global institution and the diplomatic weight of an office that has outlasted empires. All of that is real, and all of it matters. But in the Augustinian tradition that formed Robert Francis Prevost, the real work has always been interior. The great saint from Hippo, whose restless heart became the spiritual compass of an entire religious order, wrote his most important words not for public policy, but in a long private prayer to the God he addressed as the one in whom alone the restless heart can rest. Leo XIV has been living that prayer every day for 50 years. He keeps living it now, in the small chapel before sunrise, in the margins of an ancient text, at a shared table, along a quiet garden path, in the names he remembers and the notes he writes, and the child he stops for, and the evening prayer he speaks into the silence before he sleeps. The cameras are not there for any of it. That is exactly the point. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us in the comments which of these habits surprised you most.